My name is Rachel Hayes. I'm 26 years old, and until recently, I believed I had found the love of my life. Daniel Carter wasn't just my fiancé. He was my partner, my safe place, the man who made me believe in happy endings again. Or at least, that's what I thought. Looking back, the warning signs were there, scattered like red flags in the wind. I just didn't want to see them. We met 3 years ago at a mutual friend's charity event. I remember wearing a simple navy dress I'd found on clearance, nervous about attending something so upscale. Daniel had walked straight up to me with that confident smile of his, complimenting me on how refreshingly real I looked compared to the plastic crowd. I thought he was charming.
Genuine.
It didn't even cross my mind that the very things he claimed to admire would later become the ammunition he used to wound me. From the beginning, I was aware of our differences. Daniel came from money. His father was a corporate attorney, his mother, a socialite who spent more time in charity galas than at home. He grew up in a mansion, went to private schools, and summered in Europe. I, on the other hand, was raised in a modest middle-class household. My father was a mechanic, my mother a schoolteacher. We never had much, but we had enough, and most importantly, we had love. When Daniel and I got serious, I thought those differences didn't matter. He seemed unfazed by my simpler lifestyle, even intrigued. "You keep me grounded," he'd tell me, brushing a stray hair from my face. "You're not like the other women I've dated." I used to smile, flattered, thinking it was a compliment. Only later would I realize it was the foundation of his condescension. Still, love makes us blind, or maybe it makes us willfully naive. When he proposed on our second anniversary, in front of dozens of people at a fancy rooftop restaurant, I didn't hesitate. I said yes, heart pounding with joy, convinced I'd just secured my forever. The first crack appeared a few weeks after the proposal. We were at a boutique looking at engagement party outfits when I gravitated toward a sleek, understated cocktail dress. It was simple but elegant, and importantly, it was within my budget. Daniel frowned. "Babe, don't you think it's a little plain?" he asked, pulling out a sequin designer gown with a price tag that made my stomach twist. "Something like this would make more of an impression." "I don't need to make an impression," I said lightly, though I felt a pinch in my chest. "I just want to feel comfortable." He sighed, dropping the gown back onto the rack.
Fine.
"But don't be surprised if people think you're, low-key." I laughed it off then, not realizing the weight of those words. It all came crashing down 2 weeks before our engagement party. I had stayed late at Daniel's apartment after we finalized some seating arrangements. He excused himself to meet his friends for drinks at a nearby bar, and I decided to surprise him by dropping off the dessert samples we had picked up earlier. When I arrived, I found him at a corner booth, his laughter loud and boisterous. And then I heard it. "Rachel's great, don't get me wrong," Daniel was saying, "but she's cheap. Like, painfully cheap. She buys dresses from clearance racks and thinks she's killing it. Half the time I feel like I'm dating a bargain hunter, not someone who fits with me." His friends erupted in laughter, one of them adding, "Well, at least she's not after your money, man." Daniel smirked. "Yeah, but come on. Sometimes I wonder if she's going to show up to the engagement party in Payless shoes." They roared again, and I, frozen in the doorway, clutching a dessert box, felt like the floor had caved in beneath me. The word cheap sliced through me. It wasn't just about clothes or money. It was about who I was at my core. Daniel hadn't just mocked my spending habits. He had mocked my upbringing, my values, my sense of self. And he had done it in front of his friends, laughing like I was some kind of joke. I wanted to storm in, to throw the box at his smug face and scream. But I didn't. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart pounding, tears burning in my eyes. That night, lying awake in my tiny apartment, I replayed his words again and again.
Cheap.
That's what he really thought of me. That's what he said when he thought I couldn't hear. By the time dawn broke, my anger had cooled into something sharper.
Clarity.
If Daniel thought I was cheap, if he thought I didn't belong in his world, then maybe I needed to remind him and everyone else what real value looked like. Not the kind bought with money, but the kind earned with integrity, strength, and courage. The engagement party was still on, but it wouldn't unfold the way Daniel expected. As I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror that morning, chestnut brown hair falling loose around my shoulders, hazel eyes still red from crying, I whispered to myself, "You'll see, Daniel. You'll all see." The days leading up to the engagement party were a blur, but not the kind of blur you'd expect when planning a celebration of love. Instead of excitement, I carried a storm inside me: anger, humiliation, and something else I hadn't anticipated: clarity. I hadn't told Daniel I'd overheard him at the bar. Every time he called or texted, acting like nothing was wrong, I bit my tongue. When we met to finalize the party details, he was his usual charming self, dropping casual kisses on my cheek, complimenting my cute little outfit, and bragging about how well-connected the guest list was. I smiled back, nodding, playing the part of the doting fiancé. But inside, I was simmering. Every word he spoke reminded me of what I'd heard: his laugh as he mocked me, his friends' voices piling on like hyenas. One night, as I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, I typed out the word cheap in bold, black letters across a blank document. I stared at it for a long time, my heart racing. Then, slowly, I began to type underneath, "If cheap means knowing how to stretch a dollar because I wasn't born into wealth, then yes, I'm cheap. If cheap means valuing hard work over flashy labels, then yes, I'm cheap. If cheap means remembering where I came from and honoring the sacrifices my parents made, then I'll wear that label proudly." By the time I finished, I had written a full speech. It wasn't planned, not at first. It poured out of me like water bursting from a dam. Line after line, I tore apart Daniel's shallow worldview, exposing the truth of what he had mocked me for. But I didn't stop there. Because as much as I wanted to stand up for myself, I also wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd done. The idea came to me when I was walking past a vintage boutique on Main Street. In the window was a simple, elegant dress, a pale cream color, fitted at the waist, with delicate beadwork along the neckline. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't designer. But it was stunning. I stepped inside, running my hands over the fabric. The price tag made me smile, not because it was expensive, but because it wasn't. It was affordable, yet beautiful. Exactly the kind of thing Daniel would dismiss as cheap. I bought it. Not just to wear to the party, but to prove a point. Beauty isn't measured by price tags. The night before the engagement party, I barely slept. I lay awake, rehearsing my speech in my head, imagining Daniel's face when he realized what I was doing. There was a part of me that was scared, terrified even. What if I embarrassed myself? What if his friends mocked me again? What if, in the end, I came out looking petty instead of strong? But then I remembered his voice, laughing at me, belittling me in front of others. And I knew I couldn't stay silent. Silence was what allowed people like Daniel to get away with cruelty. Silence was what made women like me swallow insults and pretend everything was fine. Not this time. The morning of the party, I stood in front of my mirror, pulling the cream dress over my head. The fabric hugged me in all the right places, the beadwork catching the light as I moved. I slipped on my silver bracelet, my mother's gift when I graduated college, and took a deep breath. "You're not cheap," I whispered to my reflection. "You're priceless. And tonight they'll know it." At the venue, the decorations were extravagant. White roses cascading down the staircase, crystal chandeliers glittering above the ballroom, a string quartet playing softly in the corner. Daniel had spared no expense, eager to impress his family and colleagues. When he saw me, his face lit up. "Wow," he said, pulling me close. "You look good. Where'd you get the dress?" "Just a little boutique," I replied casually, watching his eyes flicker with that familiar judgment. He grinned, kissing my cheek. "As long as you're happy, babe. Tonight's about us." But we both knew that wasn't true. Tonight, for him, was about appearances. About showing off his success, his fiancé, his carefully crafted image. As guests arrived, Daniel worked the room like a politician, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, bragging about our honeymoon plans. I played along, smiling politely, though my stomach churned with nerves. At one point, I overheard one of his friends whispering to another, "Bet she got that dress on sale." They chuckled quietly, thinking I couldn't hear. I felt my cheeks burn, but instead of shrinking, I straightened my back. Let them laugh. They had no idea what was coming. The party flowed with speeches and toasts, each more insincere than the last. Daniel's best man cracked jokes about how he'd finally settled down. His mother praised his excellent taste in choosing me, though her eyes said otherwise. And then it was my turn. Daniel announced me proudly, wrapping an arm around my waist. "My beautiful fiancé would like to say a few words," he said, kissing the top of my head. I stepped forward, heart pounding, hands trembling slightly as I held the microphone. The room quieted, all eyes on me. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "It means so much to celebrate this moment surrounded by family and friends." I paused, scanning the room. I saw Daniel's smirk, his friends' smug faces, his mother's polite disinterest. And then I took a deep breath. But before I go any further, I want to address something important. Something personal. The room shifted, the energy changing as whispers began. Daniel's hand tightened briefly on my arm, a silent warning, but I shook him off. "You see," I continued, my voice stronger now, "recently I overheard a conversation. A conversation where someone very close to me called me cheap. They laughed about where I shop, about how I don't spend thousands on clothes or shoes. They mocked me for living within my means, for valuing substance over status." Gasps rippled through the room. Daniel's face paled, his smirk wiped clean. "But here's the truth," I said, my eyes blazing. "If cheap means remembering the lessons my parents taught me about hard work and gratitude, then yes, I'm cheap. If cheap means not going into debt to impress strangers, then yes, I'm cheap. If cheap means valuing love, honesty, and respect over designer labels, then I'll wear that label proudly." The room was dead silent. You could hear the string quartet stop mid-note. I lowered the microphone slightly, my eyes locking with Daniel's. Because what's truly cheap isn't the price of a dress. It's mocking the person you claim to love. It's laughing at their values, their heart, their soul. And that's a kind of cheap I'll never be. For a moment, the silence stretched unbearable. Then someone began to clap. Slowly at first, then stronger, until the entire room erupted in applause. Daniel stood frozen beside me, his jaw tight, his face red with embarrassment. He tried to force a smile, but it looked more like a grimace. And in that moment, I knew I had turned his cruelty into my strength. The applause still rang in my ears long after it faded into awkward silence. For a brief moment, I felt powerful, vindicated, as though I had taken back a part of myself Daniel tried to strip away. But as I stood there, breathing hard into the microphone, I saw the storm brewing in his eyes. Daniel's smile was stiff, his jaw clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. He leaned toward me, whispering through gritted teeth, "What the hell was that?" I didn't flinch. "The truth," I whispered back, loud enough for the people at the front tables to hear. The applause had unsettled him. His friends shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some smirking at his humiliation, others staring down at their drinks. His mother looked horrified, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping the stem of her wine glass like it was the only thing holding her together. I stepped away from him, handing the microphone back to the DJ. "Thank you, everyone, for listening," I said softly, forcing a smile. "Now, let's enjoy the rest of the night." The music started again, but the atmosphere had shifted. Conversations buzzed, but no longer with idle chatter. Everywhere I went, I felt eyes on me, whispers trailing behind like shadows. "Did you hear what she said? She called him out in front of everyone. Good for her. About time someone said something." I tried to ignore it, holding my head high as I made my way to the buffet table. My hands shook slightly as I reached for a glass of champagne, but I steadied them. This was no time to look weak. Daniel caught up with me, grabbing my elbow with a little more force than necessary. "Rachel, what the hell is wrong with you?" His voice was low, furious, his smile plastered on as though we were sharing sweet nothings. I yanked my arm free. What's wrong with me? Maybe the fact that my fiancé mocks me to his friends like I'm some kind of joke. His eyes narrowed, a vein twitching at his temple. You don't understand. Guys talk, that's all. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? My voice rose despite myself, and a few heads turned. I lowered it quickly. Daniel, you called me cheap.
You laughed about me.
Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? He pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaling sharply. You blew this way out of proportion. And now? You embarrassed me. In front of my family. My colleagues. Do you realize what you've done? I stared at him, stunned. Embarrassed him? That was his concern? Not my pain, not my dignity, his image. Something inside me snapped. If your image is more important than respecting the woman you're supposed to marry, then maybe you need to rethink what kind of man you are. He looked at me like I had slapped him. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt guilty. Almost. But then his expression hardened, and he walked away without another word, leaving me standing there with my champagne glass trembling in my hand. I took a long sip, the bubbles burning my throat, and forced myself to breathe. Around me, conversations resumed, though quieter now, tinged with curiosity. Mark, one of Daniel's oldest friends, approached me cautiously. Rachel, he said softly, that was intense. I turned to him, bracing myself for judgment. But instead, I saw something surprising in his eyes, respect. You were right to say what you did, he continued. Daniel's been different lately. More arrogant, more dismissive. Honestly, some of us were waiting for someone to call him out. Relief washed over me, mixed with sorrow. It meant I wasn't crazy. Others had seen it too. But it also meant the man I loved wasn't who I thought he was. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. As the night dragged on, the distance between Daniel and me grew more obvious. He avoided me, burying himself in conversations with his colleagues, laughing too loudly, gesturing too wildly. I could see the cracks in his charm, though. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, his movements too sharp, too desperate. I spent most of the evening with Lily, my best friend since college, who had flown in just for the party. She pulled me into a quiet corner, her eyes wide. Rachel, that was incredible. Terrifying, but incredible. I can't believe you actually did it. I laughed shakily. Neither can I. She squeezed my hand. You stood up for yourself. Don't ever let him make you feel guilty for that. Her words gave me strength. Still, as the night wound down and the guests began to leave, dread settled over me. The real confrontation was yet to come. When the last guest finally trickled out, leaving only the catering staff cleaning up, Daniel approached me. His tie was loosened, his face flushed, his eyes cold. We're leaving, he said flatly, not waiting for my answer before grabbing his coat. The car ride to his apartment was suffocating. The silence between us pressed against my chest like a weight. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, my reflection pale and strained in the glass. When we arrived, he slammed the door behind him, throwing his jacket onto the couch. Do you realize what you did tonight? He snapped, pacing the living room like a caged animal. Yes, I said quietly, standing by the door. I defended myself. You humiliated me. His voice cracked with anger. In front of my family, my colleagues, God, my boss was there. Do you think he's going to take me seriously after this? I stared at him, my chest tightening. So that's what this is about. Your boss. Your image.
Not me.
Not us. Just you. He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. You're twisting this. I love you, Rachel. But sometimes you make it hard. You don't fit in. You don't. He stopped himself, but it was too late. Don't what? I demanded, tears pricking my eyes. Don't belong in your world? Don't measure up to your precious standards? Silence. His jaw worked, but no words came out. And in that silence, I heard the truth louder than anything he could have said. I shook my head slowly. I thought you loved me for who I was. Turns out, you just loved the idea of me. The girl who made you look grounded, relatable. But you don't actually respect me. You never did. His face softened for a split second, but then he turned away, muttering, "You're overreacting." That was the final straw. "No," I said firmly, my voice shaking but strong. "I'm finally seeing clearly." I walked out, leaving him standing in the middle of his perfect, sterile apartment. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but it also felt like freedom. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, I could breathe. When I got home, I collapsed on my bed, staring at the ceiling as tears slid silently down my cheeks. The weight of what I'd done, and what I'd lost, settled over me. But beneath the grief, a new feeling stirred. Resolve. Daniel had tried to define me with one word: cheap. But I wasn't done writing my story. Not by a long shot. The morning after the engagement party, I woke to the sharp light of the sun streaming through my curtains. My eyes ached, swollen from the tears I'd shed the night before. For a few seconds, I lay still, suspended between the fog of sleep and the harshness of reality. Then, the memories returned in a flood. The speech, the applause, Daniel's fury, the ride home, and the way I had walked out of his apartment, leaving him standing alone. I rolled over and buried my face in the pillow, groaning. This wasn't how my life was supposed to look. I should have been waking up next to the man I loved, basking in the afterglow of a successful party, counting down the days until our wedding. Instead, I was alone, hollow, my chest heavy with uncertainty. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I reached for it, hesitating before unlocking the screen. Dozens of notifications lit it up. Missed calls from Daniel, texts from friends, even messages from coworkers who had heard about what happened. My hands shook as I scrolled. From Daniel: "We need to talk. You embarrassed me last night. You owe me an apology." Apology. The word made me laugh bitterly. If anything, he owed me one. Then I saw a message from Lily. "Proud of you. Don't let him spin this against you. Call me when you're ready." Her words steadied me. At least I wasn't completely alone in this storm. I got out of bed and brewed a pot of coffee, forcing myself to eat a piece of toast. My stomach twisted, but I knew I needed strength for what lay ahead. Because deep down, I knew Daniel wouldn't let this go. He thrived on control, on appearances. Last night, I had shattered both. By noon, my mother called. I debated ignoring it, but guilt pressed me to answer. "Rachel," she said, her voice tight. "What on earth happened last night? Your aunt called me this morning. She said you gave some kind of speech." I closed my eyes. "Mom, Daniel humiliated me. I overheard him calling me cheap to his friends. I had to stand up for myself." There was a pause, then a sigh. "Rachel, you don't air private issues in public. You made a scene. People are talking." Anger surged through me. "So what? Let them talk. I'm not going to stay silent while he mocks me behind my back." "Marriage is about compromise," she replied softly. "Sometimes you let things slide for the greater good." I felt my throat tighten. If the greater good means swallowing disrespect, then maybe marriage isn't what I thought it was. We ended the call shortly after, her disappointment lingering in my chest like a bruise. I loved my mother, but she came from a generation that prized appearances above all else. I wasn't sure she'd ever understand. Later that day, Lily arrived at my apartment armed with takeout and wine. She wrapped me in a hug before I could speak. "You look like you've been hit by a truck," she said gently, setting the bags on the counter. "I feel like it," I admitted. We sat on the couch, picking at noodles and sipping wine while I recounted everything, what I'd overheard at the bar, the speech, Daniel's fury. By the time I finished, Lily was shaking her head. "He's not worth it," she said firmly. "A man who mocks you behind your back and then demands an apology when you defend yourself? That's not a man you marry." I stared at my glass, the truth of her words sinking in. But what if I'm overreacting? What if I ruined everything because I couldn't keep my mouth shut? "Rachel," she said, gripping my hand, "you didn't ruin anything. You revealed what was already broken. Don't confuse the two." Her words sank into me like sunlight breaking through clouds. Still, part of me wasn't ready to let go. 3 years with Daniel. Countless memories, dreams of a future. Could it really all unravel because of one word? As if summoned by my thoughts, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Daniel. I'm coming over. We need to fix this. My heart pounded. He's on his way, I told Lily. She raised her eyebrows. Do you want me to stay? I hesitated, then nodded. Please. 20 minutes later, Daniel arrived. He strode into my apartment like he owned it, his cologne filling the air. His eyes darted to Lily on the couch, narrowing slightly before settling on me. Rachel, we need to talk. Alone. She stays, I said firmly, surprising myself. His jaw tightened. Fine. He turned back to me, his voice low but sharp. You humiliated me last night. Do you have any idea how many people were watching? My boss, my parents, my clients. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. Do you realize how humiliating it was for me to hear you mock me to your friends? To call me cheap? You reduced me to a punchline, Daniel. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing dramatically. It was a joke. Guys joke around. You're being too sensitive. I felt fury rise in my chest. It wasn't a joke to me. It was cruel. And the fact that you can't see that tells me everything I need to know.
He scoffed.
Oh, come on. You're blowing this way out of proportion. You want to throw away everything we have because of one stupid comment. Lily leaned forward, her voice steady. It's not one comment. It's a pattern. The way you belittle her, the way you make her feel small. Daniel shot her a glare. This isn't your business. She's my best friend. It's absolutely my business. I looked between them, my hands trembling. For the first time, I saw Daniel clearly, not the charming man who swept me off my feet, but the arrogant, insecure boy who needed to tear others down to feel powerful. And I realized I didn't want to marry him.
Not now.
Not ever. I think we're done here, I said quietly, standing tall. The engagement is off. His eyes widened, his face flushing red. You can't be serious. I am. My voice shook, but my resolve was unshakable. I won't marry someone who doesn't respect me. He stared at me for a long moment, disbelief etched on his face. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The silence afterward was deafening. My knees buckled, and I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. Lily wrapped her arms around me, whispering, You did the right thing. But even as her words comforted me, tears streamed down my face. Because endings, even the right ones, still hurt. That night, lying in bed, I replayed everything again and again. His words, his arrogance, my speech, the look on his face when I ended it. And beneath the ache, something else began to bloom. Freedom. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt the faintest spark of peace. The next morning, I woke to a flood of messages that made my stomach twist. It seemed news of the broken engagement had traveled faster than wildfire. Daniel's mother had texted, Rachel, whatever disagreement you had with Daniel, we can work through this. Don't make a rash decision you'll regret. His sister chimed in with a harsher tone. You embarrass my brother in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how selfish that was? Even my cousin Sarah messaged me. Wow, Rach. That speech was bold. Maybe too bold. Everyone's talking about it. I scrolled, my heart pounding harder with every word. What struck me most wasn't that people were gossiping, it was that not one of them asked if I was okay. No one seemed to care about what Daniel had said, about the humiliation I endured. They only cared about the fallout, the spectacle. Lily, bless her heart, came over again that afternoon with grocery bags and determination written across her face. You look like hell, she said, setting down a carton of ice cream and a bag of bagels. But you're going to eat, and you're going to remember that you're not the villain here. I groaned, pulling the blanket tighter around myself on the couch. Feels like I am. Everyone's blaming me. Because Daniel's spinning the story, she replied sharply. He's good at that, Rachel. He's always been good at controlling the narrative. But you don't have to play along. Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. Daniel was probably out there, telling anyone who would listen that I was unstable, overreacting, dramatic. The thought of him twisting the truth into something that painted him as the victim made my blood boil. And yet, there was still that gnawing voice inside me. What if they're right? What if I was too dramatic? What if I ruined my own chance at happiness? That evening, my mother called again. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I couldn't keep avoiding her. "Rachel," she began, her tone weary, "I heard you called off the engagement. Are you sure that's what you want?" I swallowed hard. "Yes, Mom. Daniel doesn't respect me. He never did." There was silence on the line before she sighed. "I just don't want you to throw away a future over pride. Marriage takes compromise." The word made me flinch. Compromise. That's what everyone seemed to think this was about. Like I should have compromised my dignity, swallowed the insult, and carried on smiling. "Mom," I said quietly, my voice trembling, "I don't want a marriage where I'm expected to compromise who I am just to keep a man happy." Her silence stretched, and I knew she didn't agree, but at least she didn't push further. We ended the call soon after, leaving me feeling both drained and strangely resolute. The following day, I went back to work. The whispers started the moment I walked into the office. My coworkers had clearly heard about the engagement party, how I had called Daniel out, how I had walked away. Some looked at me with pity, others with thinly veiled curiosity. At lunch, my colleague Amanda sat beside me. "Hey," she said gently, "I just want you to know I think what you did was brave." Most women wouldn't have had the guts to say that in front of everyone. Her words warmed me, easing the sting of the gossip. Not everyone thought I was wrong. Some people saw it for what it was, courage, not recklessness. Still, the damage Daniel was doing became clear when my boss pulled me aside later that week. "Rachel," he said cautiously, "I heard some things about the engagement party. I don't want to pry, but is everything okay?" I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "Everything's fine. Just not getting married anymore." He nodded, clearly uncomfortable, before changing the subject. But the message was clear. Daniel's version of events was spreading beyond family circles. It was creeping into my professional life, too. That night, alone in my apartment, I sat at my desk with my journal open. I wrote down everything. What Daniel had said, how it made me feel, the way people reacted. Writing it out helped me see the pattern, the manipulation, the dismissal of my feelings, the pressure to stay quiet for the sake of appearances. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself if I was overreacting. I wasn't. I had every right to demand respect. A week later, Daniel showed up at my apartment unannounced. I almost didn't open the door, but the pounding was relentless. When I finally cracked it open, he stood there in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, his smile rehearsed. "Rachel," he said smoothly, "we need to talk." I crossed my arms, blocking the doorway. "I think we've said enough." "Please," he insisted, his tone softening. "I know I messed up, but we can fix this. We can move past it." I stared at him, my heart pounding. He looked so sincere, so polished, the man I had once fallen for. But I remembered the sneer in his voice when he called me cheap, the fury in his eyes when I spoke my truth. "What exactly are you sorry for?" I asked, my voice steady. He blinked, caught off guard. "For upsetting you. For making you feel bad." I shook my head. "That's not an apology. That's deflection. You're not sorry for what you said. You're sorry you got caught." His smile faltered, the mask slipping. "Rachel, don't throw this away. We had a good thing." "No," I whispered, my throat tight. "I thought we did. But it was built on lies. On disrespect. I deserve better than that." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But then he simply turned, muttering, "You'll regret this," before walking away. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone, my chest heaving. Maybe he was right. Maybe part of me would regret it. But deeper down, I knew I was making the right choice. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't bending, I wasn't compromising. I was standing. And that, I realized, was worth more than any diamond ring or a lavish engagement party. In the weeks that followed Daniel's final visit to my apartment, the weight on my chest began to lift, slowly at first, like a stubborn fog, and then with startling clarity. The silence in my home, once suffocating, started to feel like peace. No more biting comments about my clothes, no more subtle digs disguised as jokes, no more pressure to play the perfect fiancé for his world. I was free, but freedom, I soon discovered, came with its own set of challenges. Daniel wasn't about to disappear quietly. I learned through friends, and through the occasional cruel message from his sister, that he was spinning his version of events at every opportunity. According to him, I had a meltdown at the engagement party, embarrassed him in front of his colleagues, and impulsively ended things because I couldn't handle his success. At first, his words stung. I worried people might believe him. But then I realized, the people who mattered already knew the truth. And anyone who judged me based on Daniel's lies wasn't someone I wanted in my life anyway. So I made a choice. Instead of hiding, I leaned into the spotlight Daniel had unintentionally created. One Friday night, Lily convinced me to join her at a women's networking event. I hesitated at first, afraid of the whispers, but she promised it would be good for me. "You need to get out there again," she insisted, linking her arm through mine. "Remind yourself who you are without him." The event was held in a chic downtown loft, filled with women from all walks of life, entrepreneurs, artists, professionals. At first, I clung to Lily, sipping nervously at my drink. But as conversations flowed, something remarkable happened. One woman, a marketing executive named Jenna, leaned in after introductions and said, "Wait, you're the Rachel Hayes, right? The one from the engagement party speech." Heat flooded my cheeks. Yes, I guess that's me." Her face lit up. "Girl, that was legendary. My friend was there that night. She told me how you stood up for yourself in front of everyone. That kind of courage? Inspiring." I blinked, stunned. "Inspiring?" "Yes," Jenna said firmly. "Too many women swallow disrespect to keep the peace. You showed people what it looks like to draw the line. Don't ever apologize for that." Her words echoed in my chest like a bomb. Maybe my speech hadn't just been about reclaiming my dignity, it had struck a chord with others too. By the end of the night, I had swapped business cards with half a dozen women who wanted to collaborate, mentor, or simply be friends. For the first time in months, I felt possibility instead of shame. The next Monday at work, I walked into the office with my head a little higher. The whispers were still there, but they no longer pierced me. Instead, I threw myself into my projects, volunteering for new responsibilities, staying late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My boss noticed. "Rachel," he said one afternoon, gesturing for me to step into his office. "I've been impressed with your focus these past few weeks. There's a new campaign launching next quarter, and I'd like you to lead it." I almost fell out of my chair. "Me?" "Yes, you," he said, smiling. "You've got the drive, and more importantly, you've got the voice. You're not afraid to stand up for yourself, and that's exactly the kind of leadership we need." As I walked out of his office, clutching the project brief, tears pricked my eyes. Daniel had tried to make me feel small, cheap, unworthy. But here I was, being recognized for the very strength he mocked. That evening, Lily and I celebrated with takeout and cheap champagne, the kind Daniel would have sneered at. We toasted from my couch, laughing until our sides hurt. To being cheap, Lily shouted, raising her glass. To being priceless, I corrected with a grin. But late that night, after Lily left and the apartment grew quiet again, I found myself reflecting. It wasn't just about Daniel anymore. It was about me. About the part of me that had accepted his digs for far too long, the part of me that had stayed silent to keep the peace. I pulled out my journal and began to write. This time not about the pain, but about the lessons. Lesson 1. Respect is non-negotiable. Lesson 2. Love without respect is not love, it's control. Lesson 3. My worth is not defined by price tags, but by integrity, courage, and kindness. The more I wrote, the stronger I felt. Weeks turned into a month, and life began to settle into a rhythm. I worked hard, surrounded myself with friends who lifted me up, and slowly started to see a version of myself I hadn't known before. Confident, independent, whole. One afternoon, I received an email from Jenna, the woman from the networking event. She invited me to speak at a small panel on women in leadership. "Your story resonated with a lot of people," she wrote. "We'd love for you to share how you turned a painful experience into strength." At first, I hesitated. Public speaking had always terrified me. But then I remembered the way the room had fallen silent at the engagement party, how my voice, shaking though it was, had carried truth and power. I said yes. The night of the panel, I stood in front of a modest audience, my palms sweating, heart racing. I took a deep breath, recalling the lessons I had written in my journal, and began. "Not long ago, I was engaged to a man who mocked me behind my back. He called me cheap. And for a while, I believed maybe he was right, that my simplicity made me less than.
But then I realized something.
Labels only have power if we let them. That night, I decided I wouldn't be defined by his words. I would define myself." By the time I finished, the audience was applauding, some women even wiping away tears. I stepped off the stage, my legs trembling, but my spirit soaring. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Thank you," she said.
"I'm in a relationship where I feel small all the time. Hearing you gave me hope that I can leave, too." Her words nearly undid me, because in that moment, I realized my pain hadn't been in vain. If my story could give even one person the courage to walk away from disrespect, then it had purpose. When I got home that night, I stood by my window, looking out at the city lights. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel broken. I felt whole. Daniel had called me cheap. But what he didn't understand, and what I finally did, was that I had something no amount of money could buy: self-respect. And that, I realized, was priceless. The morning after the panel, I woke with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in months. My phone buzzed with new messages, women from the audience thanking me, strangers on LinkedIn sharing my words, even colleagues telling me how proud they were to work with me. For the first time since the engagement party, I didn't feel like the girl who ruined her own wedding. I felt like someone who had built something stronger out of the ruins. But life has a funny way of circling back. Just when you think you've closed a chapter, it slips open again. 2 weeks later, I ran into Daniel. It happened in the lobby of a downtown hotel. I had just finished a meeting with a potential client and was walking out when I heard his voice, smooth, commanding, familiar in a way that made my stomach clench. "Rachel." I froze before slowly turning. There he was, standing in a navy suit, polished as ever, but something about him seemed dimmer. The confidence I once mistook for charm looked strained now, like a mask cracking at the edges. "Daniel," I said coolly. His eyes flickered with surprise. "You look good." "Thanks," I replied, shifting my bag on my shoulder. "I've been busy." "I've heard," he said with a tight smile. "Seems like you've made quite a name for yourself." I didn't respond, letting the silence sit. For once, he seemed the one scrambling for words. Finally, he sighed. "Rachel, listen. I know I messed up. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But you really didn't have to destroy me like that." The audacity of his words almost made me laugh. "Destroy you? Daniel, you destroyed yourself. I just told the truth." His jaw tightened, his polished exterior slipping. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. Do you have any idea how that's affected me?" I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Probably the same way it felt for me when you mocked me behind my back. Except the difference is you had a choice. You chose to belittle me. I chose to stand up for myself." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For the first time, Daniel looked small, not because I had attacked him, but because the truth had finally caught up. "Goodbye, Daniel," I said and walked away. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I realized something important. Closure doesn't always come from apologies or reconciliations. Sometimes closure is simply walking away, head held high, knowing you don't owe anyone your silence. In the months that followed, My life bloomed in ways I never expected. The project my boss had given me became one of the company's most successful campaigns, earning me a promotion to senior strategist. The panel I spoke on led to more invitations, workshops, podcasts, even a guest article in a business magazine. Every time I shared my story, I thought back to the girl who once questioned if she was overreacting. I wanted her to see what I now knew, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet, steady refusal to accept less than what you deserve. My parents, too, began to see me differently. At first, they worried I had made a mistake by walking away from Daniel. But as they watched me thrive, they admitted something I never thought I'd hear. "You were right," my father said one evening over dinner. "Respect matters more than comfort or appearances. We're proud of you for knowing your worth." Tears filled my eyes. That validation wasn't necessary, but it felt like a balm all the same. Lily remained my rock through it all. One night, sitting on her balcony with glasses of wine in hand, she leaned over and said, "You know what, Rachel? You turned being called cheap into your superpower. You didn't just own it, you flipped the whole narrative." I laughed, raising my glass. "To being cheap. To being priceless," she corrected, smiling. And she was right. Daniel's words no longer haunted me. They didn't define me. If anything, they had sharpened me, forced me to see the cracks I had ignored, and pushed me to rise stronger. The real victory wasn't in humiliating him back. It wasn't in revenge, or even in proving him wrong. The real victory was in proving myself right, that I was worthy of respect, worthy of love, worthy of a future not built on shame. One evening, months later, I stood in front of another audience at a conference. The room was larger this time, the spotlight brighter. My voice didn't shake as I began my talk. I once believed that staying silent was the safest option, that if I ignored the small cuts, the bleeding would stop on its own. But the truth is, silence is what keeps wounds open. The moment you speak, the moment you stand, that's when the healing begins. As the applause rose again, I felt a wave of gratitude for Lily, for the strangers who had cheered me on, even for the pain that had cracked me open. Because without it, I might never have discovered the strength I carried all along. And so, to anyone listening who has ever been made to feel small, cheap, unworthy, I offer this. You are not defined by someone else's words. You are defined by the way you rise after they fall. That was my story. That was my truth. And for the first time in my life, I knew I would never lower my worth again.